Hey there, Banditos. Welcome to a special episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Mike Farah, and today we have a returning guest. It is his third solo, I think fourth overall appearance. His name is Mark Waid, and Mark is the architect behind DC's huge game-changing crossover for this summer called Absolute Power. And so he sat down with us to talk all things Absolute Power. As I said, miniseries coming out today when this episode drops, Wednesday, July 3rd. And that is a miniseries with Dan Mora, but it's going to be crossing over into a number of different books. It's going to be spinning off in a number of different directions. And it's all about what happens when Amanda Waller recruits Failsafe, Brainiac Queen, and goes through with this big plan to depower all of our favorite superheroes, including Mark Waid's number one and our number one, Superman. So, without further ado, let's get to it. This is Mark Waid talking Absolute Power. How are you?
I'm good. I'm doing well. Thank you. What kind of
Great.
day has it been for you?
Oh, it's been a normal day, I'd say. Post
Yeah.
Mother's Day, the excitement has died down. So we're talking in this episode about Absolute Power, which is the latest and greatest DC earth-shaking event that is coming this summer. Just had a preview at Free Comic Book Day, which was exciting. And you're kind of the architect of this event. And
I seem to be the architect. Yes.
yes, and your brainchild will use all the all the metaphors
Yeah.
here, and to get us
I
kicked
think
off.
I think short straw is the metaphor you're looking at. So,
Okay, we'll
uh,
put that in. I'd love to hear
yeah,
about how you see yourself there in that one. Could you tell us first, just to sort of lay the groundwork, as it were, a little bit of a synopsis of what
sure.
is happening right now and where it's kind of leading without obviously spoiling too much.
Right. Give anything away. Exactly. So in the DC universe for the past year or so, different creators, different books, different writers, different editors have been sort of laying the groundwork for this, where Amanda Waller has been more and more of a presence in these books. Amanda is a notorious uh, anti-fan of superheroes, and someone who believes the world is much, much better without them in it, not because she's a mustache rolling villain, but because she genuinely believes that they are agents of chaos that create more problems than they solve. So she has engineered the Beast World event that just happened a few months ago with the Titans books. She has taken over other friends. She's taken over Terrific over in Flash and taken that away from Mr. Terrific. She's shown up in Green Arrow. She's sort of building this plan, and Absolute Power is the culmination of this plan, where she has figured out a way to eliminate superpowers from the board altogether and reduce superhumans to their human state, in which they can easily be captured and incarcerated if need be. And she will find a reason to incarcerate them.
Sounds like a fairly simple plan that will have no wrinkles whatsoever, I'm sure.
Nothing could go. What could go wrong? Exactly. And she's got her. It's really a triumvirate of terror, is what it is. It's, I mean, Amanda Waller is taking point, but her seconds in command are Failsafe from Chip Zdarsky's excellent Batman run, and as we've seen in the Absolute Power Zero, or in the Free Comic Book Day, actually, the Absolute Power Free Comic Book Day issue that came out a couple of weeks ago, and the Brainiac Queen, who is an offshoot of what Brainiac has been doing in the action slash Superman books. The him trying to create sort of a bride of Brainiac or a daughter of Brainiac or something that can scan the universe with him, and instead it falls into the hands of Amanda Waller, and that is not good for anybody.
Now, how much of this grew out of what has come before, and how much of this was something maybe you had been thinking about already in terms of the back of your mind events?
to this one in particular, this hot potato had been flipped from writer to writer over the past, few months before I got to it, where somebody thought they had a handle on it, but they couldn't quite. And then they passed it off to somebody else who thought maybe they could wrap their heads around it, and they couldn't. I know Chip, I think, was the last guy to have it and go, I can't make this work. And I couldn't have made it work either without bits and pieces from all of the other folks who had touched it before me. Like everybody had something, a little something to bring to the table. So I was able to take their some of their ideas and add them to some of mine, and some of the big mechanisms that come out of the sort of the deeper end of the DC universe pool. So the deeper into that pool, so we can dive a little bit more into DC history and pull it together from there. But again, I can't. This is not me out of whole cloth. If you like it, it's me out of whole cloth. If you don't like it, it's Chip. It's Chip and those guys.
Right.
No, in all seriousness, I mean, it really is just, I could not have done this without having a few pieces already put in place by other people.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it obviously takes place, as we've been talking about, in sort of main DC continuity. Though, you've been building up what we affectionately call the Waidverse, with,
Right.
the world's finest and Teen Titans and all of that stuff. Previous to this, does this come with any more, I assume it does, any more sort of baggage and limitations than what you'd been working on before?
It to the extent that, because World's Finest is in continuity but not in the present day, there's a lot more latitude. But that said, then there's also characters I can't play with in World's Finest because it's set in that time period, like Cyborg, or some or Blue Beetle, or whoever, that you can't really play with, that you can play with in this book. They're a lot of fun. So it's not a detriment. And in fact, we were able to pull a couple of things seated in World's Finest to play off in this book as well. Just a little subtle stuff that, if you've been reading World's Finest, you will see the connections.
Nice. And in terms of structuring the story, I know from what I've read that there is the primary miniseries, which is
Mm-hmm.
you and Dan Mora, again, your
Yep.
World's Finest collaborator. But there are sort of the scaffolding kind of around it.
Right.
Was that your doing? Was that sort of how you, in combination with editorial, how did you sort of structure this story so that it was the miniseries plus?
Right. That was me in concert with editorial. Basically, the first thing I asked for was, if we're going to do this, it needs to have some repercussions in other books. And if we want to make sure that it is a big repercussion, then can it please be Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman? I mean, as opposed to our tie-ins are only, Titans and Shazam and, whatever else. And then not to denigrate those books, but I mean, I wanted the three core members of the DC, the Trinity, to be at the heart of this. So that helps sell you on the idea that, no, this is a big deal story. So the first ask I had was, can we have Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman for those 3 months in between issues 1 and 4? And then we were building out further, and we realized we had room in there for some spotlights on the individual villains who are striking at the heroes. And so that gave us a mini series called Task Force 7 that is 7 issues long. Each of them focuses on one of the attack Amazos who are going after the heroes, and introduces and kind of fills in some of the stuff I don't have time to do in the main book. What happened to Global Guardians? I've only got 30 pages. Jesus, I don't know what to do. So here's what happened to Global Guardians. They're over in that book. I say that tongue in cheek. There is a running plot thread throughout those 7. It's not like 7 individual one shots you can pick and not pick. I wanted there to be a subplot that I put in place throughout all 7, so that there is a runner right? So it reads like a series rather than just a bunch of one-offs. Because it's really important to me that none of these books are ones that you feel like you picked up and you're like, well, this didn't have anything to do with anything. I didn't have to read this. I want you to feel like they all bring something to the table. All these books, all the crossovers have a specific purpose to the overall story, as opposed to sometimes in the past with other companies with other crossovers, it just gets out of hand and suddenly it's, Blood Hunt Spider-Man or whatever. And it doesn't, what does that bring to the table?
Right. So you're looking for, as they say in the music industry, all killer, no filler.
Right. And actually, genuine plot beats, like genuine plot developments happening outside the book that will impact what happens in the main book.
Right. Right. So it's sort of all of a piece with each other, not just, oh, we happen to be going through this event, and so we have to sort of tie in somewhere, and it's left up to,
Yeah,
how they
look,
want to
yeah,
do that. Yeah.
yeah.
And are you, it was reported early on, I think, that you were writing either the majority or the entirety of the.
That was misreported. Yeah,
Okay.
the way it was announced was I was the architect of these, and somehow in the translation to certain websites, it got turned into Mark Waid is writing all these books, but that's like it's like 30 books. Are you
Right.
kidding me? There's I have my limits, but working with the writers, envisioning what these books would be, I've certainly put my thumbprint on all of them and given some guidelines to what they need to achieve in order to make the story work as a whole. But I'm not one to sit on other writers. I'm not one. I've sat on the other side of that table. I don't. I've been the poor writer who has to just be a robot and crank out what I'm supposed to for this crossover because I have to check off these 12 boxes, and I don't want to be that person who makes the writer do that. So they've got plenty of latitude to tell the story they want to tell, as long as they hit beats, A, B, and C or whatever.
Right. Right. And so to clarify, you are writing the miniseries for sure,
Right.
and like a couple of sort of bookends, or is the
The
only the miniseries?
I'm co-writing with several different writers the Zero issue, the Ground
Okay.
Zero issue, which is
Right.
Nicole Maines and I are doing a Dreamer story. Chip Zdarsky and I did a Failsafe story, and Josh Williamson did a Brainiac Queen story that I just kind of kibitzed on. So it's basically his story. The four main books, Absolute Power 1, 2, 3, 4, that's me. And then the mini series that we call Task Force 7, that's off of outlines and guidelines that I produced. And then the one that I'm really excited about because I've not read it is the one that John Ridley is doing with the origin of Amanda Waller, and so the backstory of her. And just I can't wait to get my hands on those scripts and see what he's doing because those are going to be great.
Oh, absolutely. I can't wait either. And
Yeah.
brings me to another question, which is about Amanda Waller, because she is, a primary focus, maybe the main antagonist of this whole storyline, and has really seen her status elevated over the past, I mean, maybe even 5 to 10 years. I was going to say the past few years, as really just a big sort of heavyweight, without using that in a pejorative, in the DC universe. What do you attribute that rise in popularity to, and what do you think of her as a character?
I think she's an awesome character who is a little more nuanced than people sometimes give her credit for. I think that obviously she's a big part of the DC universe in the comics because she has become such a big part of the DC universe in the films and TV with Peacemaker and Suicide Squad and so forth. And if you hire Viola Davis to do a character, my God, that's going to be a great character. So with Amanda, the trick is, and I'm working really hard to get around this, is to not make her a mustache twirling supervillain who wants power for her own grand evil scheme. That's not Amanda at all. She genuinely believes in her cause. She genuinely believes that the world is worse off with all of these caped characters running around with no control, and self-governing and making things as bad as they do good. Um, is she right? No, because if she were right, I couldn't be writing superhero comics if I believed like her. But she believes she's right, and there are reasons she believes she's right, and we get into that. And I want them to feel like legitimate reasons. I want them to feel like sincere reasons. I give her a line in issue 2 that I think sums it up nicely, which is, once a lot of the superheroes have been dealt with, someone says, okay, now do we go after the supporting characters? Do we go after the family members? And she says, absolutely not. Those are civilians. Those are the people we are here to protect. I'm not a sociopath. So that's, to me, that is Amanda in a nutshell.
Do you find, I'll call her a villain for these purposes, but do you find
For these purposes,
villains, yeah,
yeah.
that are like her, and I guess to a
Mhm.
certain extent Lex Luthor, though he comes and goes, who are obviously not powered and they
Mhm.
are have to fight with their wits and cunning to be easier to write for, more difficult to write for? Do they work best when they are sort of paired with somebody that has powers?
They're harder to write, but they're more fun to write for me, because I think it's just low hanging fruit to write a supervillain who can punch his way into victory. That's just, anybody can write that story. It's more interesting to write somebody who is surviving, whether as a hero or a villain, by their wits and by the conscious choices they make, and by their smarts. And so I do think that I don't know that. I don't know that those kind of cerebral villains necessarily work better against powered heroes than non-powered heroes. But I do know that they are more challenging to write, but to me, they're more fun.
Makes sense. I also want to talk about more characters, and basically, you had drawn
Sure.
a little bit of a line. Well, as we were talking about, you're sort of moving a little bit from, the world's finest kind of universe to the main continuity. And you already sort of talked a little bit about some of the characters that you're allowed to play with. What were the ones you were most looking forward to, or the ones that we can look at and say that you got to play with, and these were the ones that you found most fun and most interesting?
It surprised me because I figured going in it was Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman.
Right.
But why not? Right? They're the Holy Trinity. That's the ones that, and yet, as any good story will do, it takes you down a path that you hadn't really expected. And so it has ended up being more interesting to touch upon John Kent. It has been more interesting for me to touch upon Nightwing. It has been more interesting for me to touch upon Dreamer. It is more interesting for me to touch upon some super obscure heroes that you may not know but have an active role in the story. Mr. Terrific is another one who has ended up being a bigger player in the story than I had originally visioned. And that's fun. And it is a reminder to me that somebody else asked me, like, what's the big pitfall? What are the big pitfalls that come with writing an event story? And from my point of view, the biggest pitfall is focusing so much on spectacle that you forget character.
Hmm.
That stories are not about events, stories are about characters. And so even with a giant sprawling cast of dozens, which is what I'm dealing with here, I'm really pick 2 or 3 characters, and you sort of tell the story from their perspective and through their eyes and how they are affected in the story. I mean, Kingdom Come has a million characters in it, but Kingdom Come is really about, Superman and a small handful of characters. It's about generals, not infantry. And it's the same here.
I was going to ask you about sort of point of view characters, and
Yeah.
is it spoiling, or have you already mentioned the ones that would be the point of view characters for this event?
It is, some of it would be a spoiler. Some
Okay.
of it would be a spoiler, but I don't think any of them are the ones you would expect them to be. But if I'm doing my job right, they're all ones that you would look back and go, well, of course, that makes perfect sense.
Fair. We'll look forward to who those are.
Oh,
I'm glad that there are some, by the way. I think the way to structure a story, like you're saying, that you have some person, some character that you're identifying with that's can be an active, part of the story, but is still the also plays the observer role so that,
right.
there is some attachment to the reader, I think really works just swimmingly.
Hey, so right. There's also the aspect that we've seen Superman have his powers taken away a million times. So we know how Superman acts when he doesn't have his powers. We've seen, Wonder Woman lose her powers from time to time, but there are other characters that you're not as familiar with or whatever. How do they react when their abilities are stifled, when their resources are taken away? It's not all going to be the same they don't all have the same sort of get up and go gumption of like, well, I'm down, but I'm not out, because some of them are, you know, scared, legitimately scared about what's happening. Some of them are not optimistic about getting up. I mean, some of them have powers that once you take them away, they become active liabilities in the field.
I also would imagine, and again, we haven't gotten to the main part of the story actually being published yet, but
Okay.
that, and I wonder if you went down this road with any of the characters, because we've obviously seen a resurgence of X-Men at the other company, and
Right.
one of the plot points of the continuation of the animated series had Storm losing her powers, but there are characters that would actually, I don't know if revel is the right word, but be unburdened by not
Right.
having their powers anymore. So yeah,
Examples.
yeah. What's that?
Examples. I'm curious.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I think the example I was thinking
I,
of was, who was it? I mean, any of the, I go back to X-Men because it's the characters that have physical,
right. If you take
issues, like
Cyclops'
something
powers away,
like
it's a
Beast.
plus. Right.
Right.
Exactly. If you
Yeah.
take Daredevil's powers away, it's a plus. I don't know. I'm having a hard time thinking of who in the DC universe would fit that bill, but
I'm
that's
not
why I'm
sure.
putting you
That's
on the
why I
spot,
was
because I'm
sort of
curious
like putting it
if you.
out there as I
I can't think of
wonder.
anybody. If you can,
Yeah.
if anybody pops in the mind in the next 20 minutes, shout out a name.
I guess anybody who would, maybe want to, they, yeah, DC is really kind of, again, a more hopeful place in that they don't see their powers as a burden in
As
any way.
curses.
Yeah.
Right. That's
Right.
it. If
So
you, yeah,
that's
The
sort of a
DC
Marvel
universe
thing,
is
I guess.
right. The DC universe is, if you can fly, I don't want to hear your problems. You know,
Right. Exactly. All right. So let's talk a little bit about just the new. They're not new, but they're more new than Amanda Waller, the other sort of antagonistic characters, because you said there's now a
Mhm.
new sort of villainous trinity, right? Which Amanda
Right.
Waller, Failsafe, Brainiac Queen. Um, what do you think Failsafe and Brainiac Queen sort of bring to the table? What do you, in playing with them, what have you been enjoying with those characters?
Brainiac Queen's harder to talk about because that's spoilers for issue one.
Okay.
Because she's doing things in issue one that I had not imagined in the outline, but when I got to writing it, it made perfect sense. Failsafe, though, I mean, Failsafe is right up Amanda's alley. Failsafe's mission is to make the world safe. That is his number one goal. He's Batman without remorse, right? He's Batman without Bruce Wayne. He is Batman in the sense that he wants justice and peace and order and law worldwide, and whatever it takes to get there, the ends will justify the means. So he is the one who heads up the task force that goes out and actually deals hands-on with the heroes, whereas Amanda is the one in the bunker basically making the big plays.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay. And it strikes me that both, and maybe all three, we'll see with Brainiac Queen,
Mm,
that security is sort of their paramount
Yeah.
concern,
Yeah.
and to the
Yeah.
detriment of anything else, right? Like no matter what, maybe rights have to be stepped on, or if you're trying to bring about security, and yet you're, cutting off the avenue to, superheroes doing their thing in terms of saving people. It doesn't
Right.
matter as long as we're secure.
Right. Exactly. That's she just again, you see stuff like Beast World happening. You see stuff that, other stuff has been happening in the DC universe, some of which Amanda has sort of steered them into, some of which is just stuff like death metal, that was a world changing, world shaking event. And Amanda's argument, right or wrong, is that it doesn't happen in a world without superheroes.
Right. Makes sense. I can't wait to see how this all plays out. So let's talk about the production of the miniseries. You're again teaming with Dan Mora, who
Woohoo!
we had on the program before when you guys were doing Shazam, and I guess you had to cut short your run on Shazam in order to do this. Is that
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
that's the crime of it. Yes, I mean, Dan is perfectly capable of drawing 4 books a month if he really wants to, but
Right.
he could only, he can commit to this only by dropping Shazam, which is a shame.
Yeah.
Although I will say that Josie Campbell is killing it as the new scripter of that book. And I really enjoy reading what she's doing. But Dan coming aboard made perfect sense because Dan loves drawing anything and everything in the DC universe. There's nothing I can't throw at him that he's not excited to draw. He's like a modern day George Perez in that sense. God help him.
Is he bringing anything? I mean, we want to see Dan Mora, obviously, but is he
Yeah.
doing anything maybe different for this than he would have for World's Finest or Shazam?
Yeah, there is an intensity to this that is not necessarily super present in World's Finest, because World's Finest is not as high stakes a book, and it is, almost a gentler book in a way, whereas this is bad things are happening starting on page 3, and really bad things. And Dan brings the heat, and no matter what I put on paper that makes it sound like it's a dire situation, Dan somehow manages to darken it up and make it seem even more sinister. So that's what he's bringing. I don't know what sort of darkness I've unleashed in that poor man, but it's on the page.
It's funny because he does light so well as well, like as proven by,
God, yeah,
Shazam and many issues or most
Batmite and
issues of
Mixes
World's
Pitlick.
Finest.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, but he does dark just as well.
that's awesome to hear. So you
Yeah.
guys like the new, the Scorsese and De Niro of comics now?
Right, for the time being, well, it's look, I'm not letting that guy go, no matter what. I mean, if I have to chain myself to his leg, I will not let Dan wander off.
So we said that things really got rolling, or at least started with the Free Comic Book Day preview story, and then things are really getting going in July is when the miniseries starts. Is that right?
It does. There's a ground zero issue that happens somewhere in here, and if I were smart, I'd have my notes in front of me. But it ships before Absolute Power #1, a week or two, perhaps. And that's the one that lays the groundwork with, really sort of introduces you fully to Failsafe, to Amanda Waller, if you're not terribly familiar, to Brainiac Queen, and sets her up. So I encourage you to read that. That's but the miniseries itself, first week of July. Yes.
And so since the preview has been out for a while, have you sort of clocked the responses so far? What are you hearing, and what are maybe some of the questions that you've been hearing the most that people are maybe more interested in?
People seem psyched about it. I was at a convention just this past weekend, and they were asking a lot of questions about it. I mean, really, come on. It's come from Mark Waid, but stay for Dan Mora. They're here for Dan. That's perfectly fine with me. I'm fine with that. And they know that if they've been reading World's Finest, I think they know that the characters are in the hands of people who care very much about them, not to the point where they will make their lives easy, but care to the point where these characters are in the hands of people who understand them.
That's great. Uh, it shows, I've said this before, I'm not sure on one of our interviews, but in many of our other interviews, that it really shows on the page when people care. And not only obviously just the
Yeah,
artist, the writer as well. It's
yeah.
just it shows through so easily that
Mhm.
when people care and when people are sort of phoning it in.
It
And
really does. The moment you are bored, the audience is bored too. I guarantee it
absolutely.
every time.
Absolutely. And so that makes the connection with the audience, so much more vivid. So I
Yeah,
appreciate that. I wanted to turn to sort of events in general,
sure.
or events within comic books, because there are a lot of them. I
Yeah.
think, they obviously in the 90s they started taking off, and then they got really, started picking up steam in terms of doing multiple per year. What are your general thoughts on events, and also sort of the modern era of events? Are there too many? Are they becoming unwieldy? How does story spin out of them in a way that feels relevant and sort of consequential? There's a lot in that question, so we can.
Yeah, I look, I don't, you're not going to find anybody who's going to say we're not getting enough events. No one
Yeah,
is saying that. It's unfortunately, again, that's what sells. If that's not, if events didn't sell, if things like that didn't sell, then retailers wouldn't buy them and fans wouldn't buy them, and we would get the message and we would do other things.
right.
But that's what sells. So it's there's a lot of them. And at Marvel, it feels like there's at least three going on at any given time. And I feel bad for whoever's writing Avengers this month or whatever, because this month they're going to have to do a Blood Hunt crossover. Next month is going to be a crossover with this thing and this thing and this thing, and it is tough to sustain momentum like that. That's one of the joys of World's Finest. It's one of the things I like about doing World's Finest, and why I'm so protective of it is that I get to be insulated from that. That said, there's fun in being able to play with that as a spin-off book or as a side book, if you can crack the formula right, that you get stuff out of it. I mean, without Zero Hour and Flash being in Zero Hour, we wouldn't have Impulse, because that was where Impulse
Right.
sort of really came to fore. There's other examples of times when I I told in Flash, I think there's a couple of times in the final night issue, I know that I look at that issue and I go, we really didn't want to do a final night crossover, but you know what? That was one of the best issues we did. So if you are lucky enough to be working on an event where there is enough elbow room and latitude for you to check off boxes A, B, and C, and then go ahead and do your own story as long as you can get to those points, then you can tell a really good story. And you can tell one that stands alone if it needs to, but also feeds into the main story. It's an art. It is not easy to do, but it's very rewarding when you can make that happen.
Yeah, and you said previously that you're also kind of now having been on one side of that equation and now being on the other, you're more able to be kind of sympathetic to the creators that
Oh
have
yeah,
to sort of pick up
yeah,
the pieces from these events,
right,
right? Yeah.
right. I'm
Can
not
you
going
talk a
to.
little
I'm
bit
not. I
about
don't want
that?
to tell you. Yeah, I don't want to tell you what to write in your book, but for the Task Force book, again, it's 7 issues, but each of them is headed up by a different writer. So I gave everyone like a one pager. Here's kind of where the story is taking place. Here are the characters that we need to touch upon. Uh, Here's what needs to be accomplished at the end of this, and here's some subplot pages that you can weave in so we had that sort of subplot running through all 7 issues. And from that, I was working so hard to make it as open as I could, or to say, you know, here, John Layman, here's what I think you could be doing with Aquaman and Atlantis in this story. But if that doesn't work for you, come up with a good story and we're good. And John did exactly that. John actually did try to go my way, couldn't make that work because he was running into space constraints, turned it into something else that I didn't expect. And it was a much better idea for it. And I'm all, so again, it's all I need you to do is hit these minor points. These are account for these heroes that I've given you and account for this conflict, and then whatever else kind of story you want to build out of it. Dan Waters' story is as different as, you know, as Pornset's story is, as, you know, John Layman's story, and yet they're all telling the same. They're all pulling the same way. We're all pulling the same direction.
Yeah. That's great to hear. And I find you referred to it earlier about sort of how you found some interesting things in other crossovers that you might not have found were it not for that
Yeah,
happening, even if it was,
yeah,
at first seen as a burden. Um, so I think that, like anything else, having a few constraints. I mean, I've dabbled in writing, but having a few
yeah.
constraints actually can help. I think sort of focus the
It
mind.
does. Yeah. Here's your guardrails. Basically,
Right.
it's not. I'm not telling you. I'm not driving your car for you, but I'm giving you the guardrails. You know.
Exactly. Do you think that there's some, with regard to the events and with regard to how comic stories sort of unfold now, there's a little bit of a feedback loop with what's going on the big and small screens in terms of them now increasingly exploring the multiverse and crossovers and, having characters go from here to there, that also kind of feeds into events happening in comics where, again, these characters are all coming together and then sort of falling apart. You think there's an influence in both directions that way?
Definitely. I mean, there's certainly an influence in the direction from comics to TV and film. It's unquestionable. I don't know that there's a feedback loop coming back to us. I feel like we'd be doing that same kind of stuff regardless of whether Avengers Infinity War ever happened, or whether or not, you know, these Spider-Man movies happened, or what have you, um with into the multiverse. But I it is interesting to watch them run with it, and it is interesting to I was telling this story to somebody the other day when I saw Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Hmm.
Right, I saw it at a Directors Guild screening, and at the get together afterwards, Patton Oswalt was there, and I know Patton. And I walked up to him and I said, how cool was it to sit there for the first 30 minutes, and we have seen, and you and I are the only two people in the theater who are like, oh, I've seen all this before. And then, of course, it blows up into something that's magnificent that none of us have seen before. So, but it was kind of cool to be sitting there going, for the first 30 minutes, going, oh, yeah, now you get it, huh? This multiverse is pretty cool, isn't it?
Right. And it doesn't have to be just superheroes. That I mean, that's sort of
Right, exactly.
one of the lessons is that it can be influence on different genres. You don't have to just keep it as a
Exactly.
storytelling tool for one
Right.
piece.
Yeah.
So, speaking of the movies, we know you're, from previous interviews, you're the number one Superman fan. So I have to ask you, and now, well, not with prejudging it, but just we know that there's a new Superman movie coming out. What what do you want to see from it? If you had, your, you know, opinions
I have a
were,
good feel.
yeah,
I have a good feeling. I have a good feeling. What I want to see out of it is hopefulness. What I want to see out of it is joy. I mean, it doesn't mean it has to be silly. It doesn't mean it has to be campy. It doesn't mean it has to be, all sweet and nice and saving kittens from trees all the time. But it needs to have some brightness to it. And I am looking forward to seeing a Superman who is wearing trunks again. Looking forward to seeing a Superman who is smiling and enjoying what they're doing. And I get a real strong sense that this is what we're in for. And I trust James Gunn implicitly in this.
excellent. That's what I wanted to hear. We're all looking for
Yep.
hope and optimism about the movie and about
Yeah.
that's infused within the movie. So
Exactly.
that's great. So we've talked a lot about absolute power and what's going on and what you can talk about, obviously. Is there anything else you would want fans to know without spoiling anything for this upcoming event?
Nothing that comes immediately to mind. No, I mean, because again, I'm trying to play it as close to the best as we possibly can. Because as you know, with these things, we give too much away right off the gate, and I want every issue to end with a "Oh my God, I didn't believe they took that swing with that." That's a big swing to take. So all I can tell you is, if you're a fan of Airwave, this book is for you. That's all I can tell you.
Awesome. Yeah, we don't want you giving away everything in the trailer. That is the worst type of promotion. Great. Well, Mark, I do want to know if you can tell us anything else about what is going on around Absolute Power. I'm sure it's all consuming, and what other projects we may be looking forward to from you.
Sir, still chugging away on World's Finest and having a blast with the Batmite Mixus-Pitlick story, because Dan is bringing out his Chuck Jones.
Yes.
And it is hysterical to look at, but at the same time, it takes some dark turns because it's a Batman story in part. There's that. There's a couple of other things that I'm working on at the same time at DC that we have not announced yet, but I'm sure we'll announce pretty soon. One is with one of the artists I've had some of the greatest successes with. Another is with an artist I've not worked with yet, but is everything is a home run. Every issue so far is a home run. Is that about it? Yeah, there's so much more that in the next couple of months we'll be seeing announcements about. I'm a busy boy.
It's good to be busy. Could you tell us at least if these projects are within the World's Finest universe or more in the DC proper?
There's one that's at least World's Finest adjacent, if not World's Finest branded. There's another one I'm pushing for, fingers crossed, that is another World's Finest branded book. And then the other ones are just things that I think people have been wanting. Hopefully, fans have been telling me for a long time they want to see me tackle this or this or this. And I think if those fans will get their wish.
And welcome back. First of all, happy July 4th. It's almost that time of year. So, Banditos, celebrate America. We're happy you're with us. And we hope you enjoyed the interview with Mark Waid. And we hope you go pick up Absolute Power, the miniseries he's doing with Dan Mora. It sounds very exciting. We get into a lot in that interview, including maybe a little bit of a contentious issue, which is, do any superheroes in DC would not want their powers? Are there any sort of struggling with it? But that seems to be more of a Marvel issue. But I can't wait to see how this miniseries unfolds. I can't wait to see how the whole crossover unfolds and what it does to the DC universe as a result. But that will do it for today's episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. Thank you, Mark Waid, for being on. Thank you, listeners and viewers and subscribers, for taking this show in and making it part of your feed. If you can please rate, review, subscribe, that would help get this train going, moving a little bit quicker in the direction of more people knowing about Dollar Bin Bandits. So we appreciate all your support, and we'll see you on Friday for the next episode. Peace.